Well, welcome to the final formal conversation of the day here at Women's Forum, and with a dynamic character at the forefront of political and economic reform in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Bruno Le Maire, Finance Minister of France. The theme of the conference is daring to lead in a disrupted world. Your government harnessed a protest vote to disrupt politics here in France while defending globalization and pledging reform. Minister, can France stop a reversal of globalization?
A huge question. First of all, I would like to thank you for attending the meeting. I'm afraid I'm the single man in the room. I'm not used to that. Usually in politics, you know, you are among men, and women are the single woman in the room. That's here the contrary, and I think that's for the best of our meeting. I'm not sure that our willingness is to reverse the course of globalization. I think that what we are trying to do with the new French President Emmanuel Macron is to make France greater again and to make us. I was not criticizing the United States. I just want, because next week I should be in Washington, so I would like to be a good guest and not to be criticized by the American administration. But we are willing to make France greater again, and we think that we are really ready now to introduce all the reforms that are needed to succeed in the globalization. Because, you know, in the past, there were many politicians explaining to the French people, well, globalization is the evil. It's something bad. It's something we have to fight against. And the result of that policy was really a defeat for France, more people looking for jobs, and a very bad and awkward situation for our people. So we have decided, and we are fully determined with Emmanuel Macron, to succeed in the globalization, even if we have the view that we can try to improve the globalization. We can try to build some rules for trade, for instance. But we want to succeed in the globalization as it stands, because we think that we have all what is needed to succeed in the globalization as it stands.
I'm glad you touched on rules, because I want to pick up on that. The loss of jobs from globalization and technology is a challenge for France, just like many other countries. I wonder if there was a gotcha moment here in Europe this week after the EU Competition Commissioner Vestager decided that Luxembourg had lined the pockets of Amazon to the tune of 250 million euros in the form of a tax benefit.
We have a huge challenge with the question of the GAFA. You will think that I am obsessed by the United States. It's not the case. We just want to have fair trade on the world. And we have the view that we cannot explain to small companies in France, either in Romorantin or in Célestat or in Amiens, like Whirlpool, that they are obliged to pay their taxes in France, and of course huge taxes because we are still in France. And other great companies, huge internet companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, can be in France, have their profits in France, make some benefits in France, and huge benefits in France, without paying any taxes to the French treasury.
Fair trade or financial protectionism, though, because many feel
it
that
has
you're
nothing,
victified with
it has
Silicon
nothing
Valley.
to do with protectionism. It just has to do with equity, with fairness, with fair taxation of all the activities. We want Google, Facebook, and Amazon to be in France and in Europe, but we want Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple paying their due taxes in Europe, because we cannot explain to our companies, to our people, that Google and Amazon can be in Europe without paying fair taxes to Europe.
The Americans... The Americans may have a trick up their sleeve. A lot of money is trapped offshore, but the Congress is deciding on tax reform in the next few weeks and months. If that money is repatriated, doesn't that take away this honeypot that regulators have been going after?
I don't know, but you know, I don't want to criticize the tax reform within the United States. I'm trying to introduce a very important tax reform in France, and I can tell you that it is not an easy task. Because when you want to introduce tax reforms, you are changing not only the tax system, you are also changing the culture. For instance, we have the view that it is necessary now to reduce the taxes on companies, the so-called corporate tax. And you have to explain to the people that we are not doing that for rich people. We are not doing that only for companies. We are doing that because we want our companies to hire and to be in a situation where they can create more jobs. And if we want our companies to create more jobs, we have to reduce the level of taxes on companies. But this is a cultural revolution. We like revolution in France, but tax revolution may be the most difficult one that we have to introduce in France.
Tax reform takes us nicely to the conversation on Brexit. Now, if you take a look at the latest French budget, there was a charm offensive to we financial companies. It plays pretty well to the domestic audience in France. A recent YouGov survey showed most French people want the UK to exit the EU. That was 38% to 32%. 46% said the UK should go immediately. That suggests a hard Brexit. Is a hard Brexit in France's interests?
The British people have one very important quality. They have a woman at the head of the state. But for the rest, I deeply regret this decision that has been taken by the British people. Of course, I fully respect the sovereign decision taken by the British people on the Brexit, but I'm really the view that they have made a huge and historical mistake. Now we have to avoid to go the way of hard Brexit or soft Brexit. The question is not to go the way of a hard Brexit or soft Brexit. The question is to have a fair Brexit. They have decided to go out of Europe. I regret that decision, but this is the decision of the British people. Now they have to assume the consequences of that decision. And the consequence is that they cannot benefit of all the advantages of the single market without being a member of the European Union and without accepting the rules of the European Union. You cannot be a member and not a member. You cannot have the advantages of being a member and not sticking to the rules of the membership within Europe.
We're in Europe, so let's talk about Europe. And events have moved very quickly since the French presidential election in May. For instance, the breakdown of the Grand Coalition in Germany and the arrival of the far right in the Bundestag. Just this week, a constitutional crisis is unfolding in Spain after the violence at an illegal referendum in Catalonia. Do these events have the potential to undermine France's push for greater Eurozone integration?
You're right. I really think that we are living historical times. And Europe is at stake. The European construction is at stake. We were the view, and we have been the view for many years, that Europe would stand. In any case, Europe would stand. In any case, the European construction would go forward. It's not the case anymore. The Brexit, the situation and the political situation in Spain, the very last elections in Germany with the entry of the so-called Alternative für Deutschland within the Bundestag. That's very important news, and I would say bad news for the future of Europe, which means that now we have to make a choice. Either we get rid of Europe, and we have the view that we just have to rely on nations, and I think that this is the end of history for France, for Germany, for Spain, for Italy. We will go out of history, and history will be made by China, Russia, the United States, or Brazil. Or we are the view, and with Emmanuel Macron, we are deeply the view that now we have to go forward. We have to accelerate the construction within Europe, and especially among the members of the Eurozone. And we will take very strong initiatives next year, hand in hand with the German government, to make a move forward, to have more integration within the Eurozone, and to make the Eurozone stronger. The Eurozone must be tomorrow as strong as China and as the United States.
What about separatists? European leaders have been very clever in avoiding the whole topic this week. We're looking to France for leadership on one of these issues. Do you think Catalonia has created a problem for Europe?
I think that separatism is strong when Europe is weak. Separatism is strong when Europe is not moving forward. If we move forward, and if we can explain to the people that we are doing that for the sake of improving their own personal situation, then it will be the end of separatism. But if we are not able to prove and to put on the table very clear evidences that Europe makes us stronger and improve the life of every European citizen, then we run the risk of jeopardizing the whole European project.
We're almost out of time, but let's just touch on some of the issues we've been debating here at Women's Forum, because your president took a decisive step earlier this year, declaring a gender-balanced cabinet, 50% men, 50% women. I'm sure many would agree it was a powerful message. France also has quotas to ensure board diversity, 40% women as of 2017. What is it going to take to ensure there are more women in leadership roles, because there are still very few female CEOs here in France, particularly of listed companies? Also, what is it going to take to close the pay gap?
First of all, I would like to emphasize, and Clara Guémard might be an example for that, that in France we have more than 34% of women at the head of the companies. Of course, we can improve the situation, and we want to improve the situation. And I think that France should really give the example of the necessity of accelerating the process. This is true for the companies, and if you are looking not at the head of the companies, but in the COMEX, in the leading bodies of the companies, the situation is not so good. So we have to improve the situation within the COMEX, and it will be for the sake of improving the situation of our own companies, because when you have a balanced situation between women and men at the head of the companies, I think that the results are far better. This is the same for politics. And when you are looking at the change in the very last Assemblée Nationale, the French people have decided. They have decided to put far more women and deputies. 35, I think, % of the French Assemblée Nationale now has women on the banks on the Assemblée Nationale. That's good news. But if we want to improve the situation, we just have to prove to the French people that having women at the head of the state, at the head of the companies, in powerful situations, improve the situation of everybody.
And should there be a dose of Hollywood here? If we can't get a pay rise for women in the same positions as men, should the men take a pay cut?
My answer is yes.
Minister, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Bruno Le Maire, Finance Minister of France.
And thank you for your invitation. Thank you.